good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's HDI webinar, Sneak Peek the 2016 Desktop Support Practices and Salary Data. Today's webinar is brought to you by LogMeIn Rescue, and LogMeIn's presenter today will be Peter Zanoon. I'm Roy Atkinson, and I will be your moderator and one of the presenters today. We have just a few announcements before we begin.
Hi, Roy. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Peter. How are you?
Hanging in there.
All right. We'd just like to let folks know about some ways to stay in touch with HDI and some details about the webcast. If you're experiencing any technical problems, please refresh your browser. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the webcast, and they'll be answered during the Q&A session toward the end. You can download the slides from today's presentation by opening the Attachments tab on your BrightTalk screen. The slides will automatically advance throughout the event. Remember that today's webinar will be available on demand shortly after the completion of this live webcast, and you will receive an email reminder to let you know that it's available. You can stay connected with HDI on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on our members-only community site, HDI Connect. Today's presentation features some stats from our 2016 research, which is not yet published, so you're getting an early view here, specifically in the area of desktop support. You're getting the first look. I'm just going to launch right into this stuff. It's going to be some interesting stats for you. We know that we can trust some desktop support stats because more than half of organizations track desktop support tickets separately from other tickets, and there are several ways that they delineate between support center tickets and desktop support tickets. One of the ways is by the group it's assigned to. One way is by the type of support that's being offered. Obviously, if it's desk-side support, in many organizations, desktop support is responsible for that if a technician needs to go to the desk side. That may also be items to which desktop support, as kind of a level 2 in many organizations, has access to and authority to fix, which the support center may not. However, we are seeing a little bit of a convergence in some ways between desktop support and the support center. Many organizations have had what they call level 1.5, which may have some elevated access. But we're also going to look at remote support. We're going to be talking a lot about remote support today. It's a huge factor. Coming from the desktop support background, I can tell you that it certainly changed the way that we did business when I was running desktop support. And having remote access is a wonderful thing. So we're going to be talking a lot about that. But first, let's talk about the frameworks and methodologies used by desktop support. Well, no surprise, ITIL is still a big number one. In fact, it is up from last year. Of course, we don't have exactly the apples-to-apples comparison between years. It all depends on who takes our survey. But it looks like this year ITIL is a much stronger contender for the front runner here. And as it was last year, HDI Support Center Standard is second in contention at a little over 20%. That's roughly the same as it was last year. And a lot of these other frameworks and methodologies are also used in desktop support depending on what exactly they're responsible for and what their organization recommends. And this shows you how desktop support is situated in the organization. So, as you can see, in well more than half of organizations, desktop support and the support center are distinct and separate functions. They have separate management reporting, for example. They have a desktop support manager or even a desktop support director separate from the support center manager or support center director. They meet somewhere else up the chain. Desktop support in some organizations is a support center function where the analyst will rotate in and out of various responsibilities. And then for about a third of organizations, desktop support is a function within the support center. So the analysts take on support functions as needed. And this does not include those who have a jump and run model. In other words, if a call comes in that requires desktop support, the analyst will actually go to the desk side. This is everybody else besides that. So in a little less than 2/3 of organizations, more than half at any rate, desktop support is a distinct function. And then how is the desktop support team distributed within the organization? So this is a little bit more complicated now. About 36% are on-site only, meaning they live in the same offices as most of the employees do or most of their customers do. And then about 12% single site, single country, but not on-site. So it might be a separate office or a managed services provider that provides desktop support that doesn't live in the same building or on the same office campus as those to whom they provide support. And then multiple sites, over a third, have multiple sites within a single country. That makes sense, I think. Different offices situated around. If you have a large organization, you might have several sites that offer desktop support. Sometimes desktop support technicians are situated in various facilities so that they can offer on-site support for people who are having issues or need things done. And then in about 15% of organizations, they're in multiple countries. So it might be a follow-the-sun model similar to the support center, where desktop support is offered from the Philippines or from India or from someplace outside the country. State of desktop support as far as hiring is concerned. This has changed a little bit. Desktop has lost a little bit of ground this year. Last year, 27% of organizations were expanding their desktop support. This year, it's less than that, only about 15%. 49% were filling openings, and this year it's 57%. So that's gone up. And then 21% were frozen last year. That's now 24%, and about 3% were cutting last year. So that desktop support is not quite as strong as it was last year, but it's still in a pretty good position. You still got a substantial number of organizations that are either expanding their operations in desktop support or at least filling open positions, well more than half there. And this has always been a question, at least for the last 5 or 6 years, because of things like VDI, because of increased authority and access by the support center, is the work going away? And the answer is pretty much no, it's not. Only 13% of desktop support organizations reported they experienced a decrease in the volume of tickets, while 56% reported that they saw an increase in the volume of tickets. So the work is still coming into desktop support at a very substantial rate. Most commonly cited factor for increase in tickets for desktop support was the number of customers. So that indicates some business growth. They're taking on more customers for desktop support, and as you know, when new people come into an organization, very often desktop support gets involved in terms of provisioning new equipment and that type of thing, putting new phones on desks, because a lot of desktop support organizations have become involved in telecommunications, in audiovisual, in network connectivity, all kinds of operations besides just computers. So those areas are expanding in a lot of businesses, and that's a pretty healthy sign. Last year, 69% of organizations saw an increase in the number of tickets, and 16% saw a decrease. So again, the numbers reflect a little bit of a change. Nothing too drastic, but there are fewer organizations that are seeing an increase in the number of tickets. So either that's better health in their IT, because we know that when the number of incidents goes up, it indicates more failures within IT, more faults. And so that could be a good sign. On the other hand, maybe it's just not as many tickets getting into desktop support, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why that might be. So this is an interesting stat. What percentage of tickets escalated to desktop support could have been solved by level 1? And in a lot of organizations, that seems to be the case. You've got about 15% that were greater than 30% of the tickets that they're receiving could have been solved by level 1. And then about 20 to 25% of tickets that could have been resolved by level 1 were escalated to desktop support in over 15% of organizations. So I know there's a lot of percentages here, percentage of organizations and percentage of tickets, but what it shows is that a fair percentage of tickets, not an overwhelming number, but a fairly large percentage of tickets that could be resolved by level 1 are getting escalated to desktop support. Now, why does that happen? One of the reasons it happens is that the support center simply perceives that it doesn't have time. And that could be short staff. That could be, we don't want to do this, and so we're going to throw it over the wall to somebody who gets paid more than we do. There might be some of that involved. As I recall, we used to catch a lot of tickets that came over the wall from the service desk when I was running desktop support. So it's still an issue, and it might be worth looking at in your organization. And I don't know, obviously we don't know exactly what your stats are for this, but it might be worth considering what exactly is level 1 solvable. And as it says on the bottom of the slide there, that means that level 1 has the skills, the access and the authority, and the documentation. And of course, knowledge sharing is a very important function. And oftentimes what we find is that desktop support isn't doing a terrific job of updating knowledge and giving documentation to the folks at level 1. And so they might be a little bit confused or might not have the proper documentation or up-to-date documentation to do some of the things that desktop support does. And so it's exceedingly important to make sure that the knowledge management initiatives in your organization are not restricted to just the support center. That's where a lot of KCS stuff happens, et cetera, but it's also exceedingly important to get desktop support involved, as it is for level 3 and up. The engineering folks need to be sharing knowledge downwards. It's all part of the Shift Left initiative. Get as much work down to level 1 and even out to level 0 as possible. And as the technology improves within organizations, it becomes easier and easier for people to access and get things done. And again, remote control and remote assistance are topics that we're very concerned with today. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that. But automation, self-service, all of those things can assist level 1 in getting things done and not escalating them up the chain to where it's more expensive, takes longer, and is farther away from the customer. So level 1 solvable is something good for you to work on. We ask about what are the must-have technologies for desktop support organizations. And these are the top 5 that they mention. Alerts and monitoring tools, which is up this year. People want to know as soon as possible if there's a fault anywhere or if there's something that needs to be fixed. So and desktop support is becoming much more involved in that. It's one of the areas that they're expanding in, looking at those alerts and monitoring tools that are directly pertinent to their wheelhouse, as it were, and making sure that things are running smoothly. It's not just the system administrators who are paying attention to the alerts and monitoring. It's also desktop support, and in a lot of cases, it's the support center as well. Incident management system, well, that's pretty much a no-brainer. We're going to look at a little bit of a stat there. We need some place to record what the issues are, who's fixing them, how they're fixing them, and updating the documentation involved with all the cases and being able to pull reports out of those so that we can know exactly what's going on and gather metrics around what's being done. Application license management. exceedingly important and is a thorn in the side of very many desktop support managers. I can tell you from my work with the Desktop Support Forum within HDI and with past work with the Desktop Support Advisory Board, application licensing management is not an easy task, and it's increasingly important now because there are so many different models out there. You have the penetration of things like Office 365 and other SaaS products that are subscription-based, and you have on-premise software that also has different licensing requirements, and who's got it, and did they pay for it, and how many people are using it, and do you have to true up at the end of the year? All of those issues very often revolve around desktop support being able to put their hands on exactly what is being used where, by whom, for how much. And there are some tools that are used very widely within desktop support organizations to help with that application license tracking, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Application packaging. Well, how does the stuff get installed in the first place? Obviously, that's of big interest to desktop support. They want to minimize the amount of travel that they have to do to desk sides to do things like software installation. It used to be that people would have to go around with optical discs, or even going back farther, floppy disks, or pull down installers over the network. That's not the case anymore. Most of it is done by either making packages available that are automatically installed, or making packages available so that users can do self-installation, and so that packaging software becomes increasingly important over time. And remote control, as I said, minimizing the time that desktop support technicians are traveling, minimizing the amount of time that customers have to wait for things to happen. If you think about it, even going across a substantially sized business campus takes a lot of time. By the time the desktop support technician gets to the ticket, accepts the ticket, starts the clock on the ticket, gets across the office campus to the person's desk side, finds them, makes contact with them, and gets the work done, as opposed to making a phone call and making sure the person is at their desk, getting permission to connect via remote control. And in some cases, you can automate that, or you can have a text message pop up on the person's screen asking for permission. They accept the permission, and you can remote into their desktop and do whatever it is that you need to do to fix, install, or modify their desktop configuration. So it's a huge time saver and energy saver for desktop support to be able to connect. And as we will see, it's being used substantially by the support center as well. So here's a couple of big changes since last year in desktop support technology use. You see that the technology use has gone up almost across the board. Some cases things have gone down a little bit. In some cases they've gone up a little bit. But with remote control, it's gone from 85% of organizations using remote control last year to 92%. So we're getting up toward the days when everybody, literally everybody, will have a remote control at their disposal to solve some desktop support problems. And also incident management systems. So we're moving away from what might be called just trouble ticket systems, or maybe homegrown database systems, and getting into a little bit more sophisticated incident management. As I mentioned earlier, having the places to really document and be able to pull reports is exceedingly important. And that took a healthy jump, too, from 82% of organizations last year to 91% this year. So those are the two big jumps: remote control use and incident management systems. And so we'll take a look at the day in life of a desktop support technician on this one. And as you can see, just about half their time is spent working on ticket resolution. It's the biggest part of their job. As it is in the support center, it's maybe taking phone calls or chat sessions or answering emails, whatever, creating tickets and resolving issues. That's also the case for desktop support, just working the ticket resolution. Some time spent on projects, training meetings, professional development, knowledge management is about a 7% chunk there. And then problem management, which is where I think desktop support can have a substantial contribution. Since they're hands-on, a lot of times might have a fair inkling of what a root cause might be and can contribute to the problem management process in their organization. And then there's that asset management function, which also has to do with the software licensing and hardware allocations. And we're pretty good at tracking hardware assets these days, but still about, and this is not included in this presentation, but about a third, between 29 and 32% over the last couple of years of organizations don't really track their hardware assets when there's a termination or separation. So if somebody leaves the organization, they may leave with a laptop, or they may leave the laptop behind in a desk drawer somewhere, and it's not recovered by desktop support, which is, again, it's a complicated job. A lot of people do stash stuff in desks, as we know. If you've ever worked desktop support, you know that that happens. And it can be very difficult to locate assets, especially if the asset threshold at your organization is high. For example, I worked with one organization where they had increased their asset tagging policy from $500 items up to $5,000 items. So laptops fell right off the board. Desktops fell right off the board. They didn't even tag them. They didn't number them. And it became exceedingly hard to track those assets. So there might be other ways you want to do that. A lot of you use barcode stickers and optical scanners, et cetera, to track those assets. And it can be a tricky thing. So asset management can take some of your time as well. But most of the time, desktop support folks are spent on resolving tickets, which makes perfect sense. And here's why we say ticket resolution and why we don't say incident resolution. Simply because so many organizations do not separate, do not track their incidents and service requests separately. This is a topic that I write about fairly often. It's something that I speak about fairly often. It comes up in conversation with other professionals. And it's important, I think, to make the difference obvious between what's an incident and what is a request or other work that we do. Simply because incident, it's the difference, I use the supermarket analogy, it's the difference between cleanup on aisle 5, that would be an incident, and customer needing assistance on aisle 5, maybe somebody having trouble reaching the top shelf from a wheelchair or something like that. It's a big difference. And the difference is something has gone wrong versus something somebody needs or has asked a question about. Those service requests generally indicate that people have a trust in the ability of the IT organization to provide that service, whereas when stuff breaks, it's not a very good thing, and it interrupts work, and it generates work for the support center and for desktop support to do that's not proactive. It's firefighting. And so if we can start to do a better job of tracking incidents and service requests separately, we can start to get a better idea of how well we're doing, not just as a desktop support organization, not just as a support organization, but as IT in general or technical services in general, however it is in your particular company. So about 52.5% measure incidents and service requests separately. So that's the good half. And then the less good half, in my estimation anyway, is distinguish between service requests and incidents, but don't measure them separately, and that's about 19%. And I'm not sure why you would distinguish between them but not measure them separately unless your particular software package doesn't have the capability to do that, and maybe you should look into a way to do it because it's important. And then in about almost 30%, 28.7% of organizations don't distinguish between incidents and service requests at all. So we say tickets a lot of times when we refer to our research simply because so many organizations do not distinguish between incidents and service requests. And it should be a higher number that do that. So let's see how we do next year. I mentioned before about time spent, scurrying across an office campus or a college campus or wherever your organization is centered. But a lot of times, desktop support techs do have to travel to other locations. They may have to go out to a satellite office or to a bank branch or to a manufacturing plant that's outside of their immediate area. And about 70% of desktop support techs travel at least sometimes to provide support. That's a high number. And about 69.3, or roughly 70%, use their personal vehicles at least sometimes. Now, company cars are also used in the 60% range, so there's a lot of mix. Sometimes they use a company car, sometimes they use a personal vehicle, but use of personal vehicles is very high. And then about half who use personal vehicles are reimbursed just for their gas, and about 86% are reimbursed for mileage. So that's an additional expenditure as well. If they're not using those company cars and they're using their personal vehicles and reimbursed for mileage, let's hope that mileage isn't too high because that can get very expensive very fast. So however it is done in your organization, you might want to monitor some of that. And another issue that comes up a lot with this type of travel is how you track windshield time. How do you know how long it actually takes a tech to get somewhere and get back versus how long it took them to actually do that? And a lot of organizations are looking for add-on time tracking that kind of plugs into their incident management system so that the techs can clock in and clock out in terms of travel, and it makes things a little bit easier. Usually it's a separate tool, and almost exclusively it is manually operated, so you have to start it and stop it. So you're dependent on the technician's ethics there. But it's a good thing to be able to track at least loosely that windshield time, because that's non-productive time. It's time that they're not fixing something. So who's responsible for providing remote support? And I alluded to this a little bit earlier. And as we see, the support center staff has that capability at least in 81% of organizations, and desktop support staff in 80.6. So it's really indistinguishable. You look at a margin of error there, it's neck and neck. The support staff and the desktop support staff are equally tasked with providing remote support. Meaning that pretty much everybody has a remote tool of some type, being able to remote into various computers and provide screen sharing or remote fixes. And it's neck and neck. It didn't used to be that way. It was almost exclusively desktop support who had that task, but not anymore, simply because the tools are better and the capabilities of the support center staff are increasing. So they have the authority and access to be able to do remote support. And here again, how many desktop support teams are formally measuring the percentage of tickets resolved through remote support? Well, it actually went down a little bit since last year. It's a little over a third of teams are formally measuring the number of tickets that are resolved by remote support. That might be something you want to look at if you're not looking at it now. Again, especially for cost reasons, you want to be able to tell the difference between a ticket that was resolved by somebody getting in their car, driving 15 miles, going to somebody's desk and performing an operation, and then getting back in their car and coming back to the office and then getting reimbursed for their gas, as we were just talking about, versus being able to fire up a remote control tool and fix something remotely or reconfigure something remotely or install something remotely and getting it done in 15 minutes. It can be a huge difference in the amount of costs involved, and costs are certainly important in the world of today's IT organizations. Costs should be minimized, as always. And here's a look at how many desktop support tickets are resolved by a remote support. And again, it's a complicated graphic, but essentially what we wind up with is that about half can be or are being resolved remotely. If you look at the left side of the screen there, and you can see that quite a few organizations, more than a third, are resolving between 51 and 75% of their tickets, and about 26 to 50% of organizations are resolving, about a third are resolving 26 to 50% of their tickets remotely. So the median is right in there at about 50%. So it's amazing advance that has happened over the past certainly 10 years and probably 5 years with the capabilities of remote control tools to be able to resolve so many issues. And also, it's kind of a testimony to the fact that it's usually not hardware that's breaking, which used to be the case a lot, that hardware would break and had to be actually hands-on repair or replace. So a lot of tickets are getting handled by remote support. And with that, I would like to introduce Peter, who you heard from a little bit before, and just tell you a little bit about Peter Zenoon. He's the Director of Products for LogMeIn Rescue, which is part of LogMeIn's Connected Products and Customers business unit. He's responsible for shaping the vision, the product strategy, messaging, and overall direction of the Rescue brand, which focuses on providing technicians an elegant, reliable, and cloud-based application for delivering world-class customer service and remote support. And prior to LogMeIn, Peter managed and designed various enterprise-level e-discovery products for Recommind, and Peter holds a BA in computer science and an MBA from Boston College, as well as a master's in information systems management from Carnegie Mellon. In his free time, Peter enjoys playing golf, my kind of guy, traveling, and chasing his toddler daughter around the house. So, Peter, take it away.
Thanks, Roy. And just for an update, she's now running all over the house and watching movies repeatedly, which any parent in the on the webcast could probably attest to. I don't know if I've seen Finding Nemo as much as I have in the last couple of weeks, but I mention her because she really does accentuate a lot of what's going on with this world right now. Because like Roy was mentioning, we're seeing a lot of changes that are coming into this to the technology world that we're living in right now, and the need and the way how we support our customers is really changing. I usually start by mentioning this one statistic that'll pop up on this slide, pardon, but the webinar platform doesn't allow for it to build, so I'll mention it all at once. And it comes from the idea of really babies. And the statistic that I show is that every day there's about 350,000 babies that are born. And in that same time period, there's about 500,000 iPhones and 1.5 million Android devices that are sold per day. So just as a concept of how connected our children are, and this is growing each day, the day they're born, they're essentially handed a little over 1 iPhone and 3 Android devices the minute that they're born. That's extreme connectivity in this world. And the reason why that's a big deal is because it's starting to change the way that we're looking at the actual technology that is in this world. There's universal connectivity, and that's growing really exponentially. And there's almost nowhere in this world that you can be and not be connected to the internet. And that's now extended to flights, boats, middle of the ocean. There's literally not one place I can think of that we don't have constant connectivity. And because of that, we're starting to find new ways to communicate across these channels. And it really spans across generations. If you look at some of the older generations, they've started reducing a little bit of their phone usage, but most of that is predominantly voice in that generation. Now you move into millennials. I don't think I know a millennial that knows how to properly use a telephone, but the smartphone devices, they can utilize almost every aspect of that to communicate in a variety of different ways. And they've actually revolutionized how we're communicating. So now it's starting to really spawn into different areas and different generation gaps, bringing in SMS, chatbots, or web chat, Snapchat. All different communication methodologies are now starting to span and to propagate. With all of that, you're starting to see an increase in complexity of products and interactions. And all customers really want, or all users out there really want, is to have everything to be very simple and elegant. This poses a significant problem when it comes to us in the help desk, because if your users and your employees think everything is simple, elegant, efficient, works correctly together, is very easy to set up and to use, they're expecting that to be the same way that everything happens in our offices and in our technology we use for work. And if it doesn't work, they're going to come on down and they're going to start talking to you about it, or they're going to ping you on Slack or on any sort of communication method. And the funny thing that we've noticed is that it might not even be something that you fully support, but they're expecting you to support it. They might download Evernote and want it to synchronize with their email or their phone or anything, and they don't know how to do it, so they're going to come and talk to you about it. And our final point is that really in this world that we live in, there's unlimited information and options, so we've almost regressed into children and toddlers, if you will, because we want the experience to occur how we want it, when we want it, the way we want it, on what devices we want. We've really become selfish. And it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. And when it comes to the IT department, it's really a bad thing, because if like I mentioned before, if technology is not working the way we expect it to or want it to, we're going to complain and we're going to be very vocal about it. So we've really built this world where everything that we have out there is connected. It's all interoperable. It's all communicating with everything that we have in all our houses, all of our technologies that are around. And we want it to work 24/7, 365. And the minute that it goes down, we get a little upset. I think the best analogy that I heard from somebody when I was actually at the HDI conference a couple weeks ago that they told me was, if my email doesn't work for half an hour, I'm fine. If my phone stops working and I can't Instagram the food that is in front of me, I actually get very upset. And it's a good analogy because we've turned all of these technologies into being something that we've depended upon, but we're okay with certain things that go down and certain things that don't. As we become an increasingly connected world, downtime could actually be very, very detrimental to our well-being. Think about a Nest thermostat. If that goes offline or that stops working, the heat in your house doesn't work correctly. That can actually have significant problems, and these are things that we never really experienced in generations before. Thermostats worked, radiators worked. They were all simple technologies that would be easy to use and to fix. But now with that increased technology, it makes it easier, but it could make the problems even more difficult. But every day is really a new challenge. And like Roy was talking a lot about before, there are a ton of new challenges that are hitting us in the IT space as well. The biggest one, like I mentioned, with everything that we have before, we're now making it easier to work from home. No matter how much I'll mention statistics on how different millennials are than really the rest of the generations that we've experienced, there is one statistic that always stands out at me, and that's millennials typically work about 30% more time than other generations. It's mainly because they're always on. They don't sit in the office from 9 to 5 like we used to. They'll go home. They're online until 7, 8, 9 o'clock. You can text them. They'll jump on to an issue right away. Email is always on their phone. They're always connected, and they're always doing a little bit more work than other generations used to. It might not mean that they're working harder or they're working smarter, but they're just on a lot more. that makes them very valuable employees that are out there. But the problem is that it also brings in a whole new issue that we have to address, and that's the mobile worker. IT departments are really struggling right now, like Roy was mentioning, to really handle all the issues that are within the four walls of their office. Once they start expanding those walls and eliminating them completely, that's when more issues can really come up. And the mobile workforce is going to become massive in the next couple of years, and it's only going to get worse. By 2020, 75% of the total workers are going to be mobile workers. I know companies that have actually completely switched to a remote workforce because it's easier to recruit and to bring them on in, but it makes it significantly harder to manage from an IT perspective. How do you make sure their internet is secure? How do they make sure that they're getting all the technology that they need as efficient as they need to? How do you make sure that they're working? You know, how do you monitor these individuals and make sure that they're actually doing the job you're paying them to do? All new challenges that are coming on up. And these IT challenges actually, you know, really are just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, between new technologies and new devices that are coming on in, and Roy was mentioning some of that before as well, to really increasing, you know, the expectations of end users and growing costs, it's really amazing. And then the flip side of all of this is that when it comes to any sort of budget cuts or any sort of funding cuts, the IT department is typically one of the first ones that feels the pain, if you will. We had a little bit of an issue about, you know, 5 to 10 years ago during the recession, but most of us survived through it pretty, you know, with our head above water. And a lot of companies looked at that and saw, if we're able to tighten our belts during that time period, we can really keep them a little tighter, maybe not loosen them as much as we used to have them loose. So then we can, you know, make sure that we're still cutting budgets or reducing costs or really making things as efficient and as streamlined as possible. That poses a significant challenge because we all know it's much easier if we have the proper funding, if we have the proper resources, if we have the proper abilities to do our job. It's tougher to do that when you're actually trying to reduce your headcount, your cost by 30%. But don't worry, there's definitely things that can help. And one of the ways that we believe you can actually help resolve some of these issues is through LogMeIn Rescue. For those of you who don't know who LogMeIn Rescue is, we are a remote IT support services platform that can help alleviate many of these issues that we talked about. It provides unlimited unparalleled mobile support, unlimited scalability, secure and reliability remote control connections to PCs, Macs, and mobile devices. And we also provide you ways to resolve some of the problems that you have not been able to resolve before. Since we started our software about 11 years ago, we've really mastered the ability to remote control and diagnose PCs and Mac devices. We've extended that into mobile and Android and Apple devices about 5-6 years ago. And within the past 12 months, we've released technology that allows you to really visually support almost anything with our Rescue Lens application, providing a live data stream of video over to the technician where you can actually see the problem that the customer or the end user is having and resolve it without having to drive over, can really not only save you a ton of money, but also can save you a ton of time. Like Roy was talking about before, one of the hidden costs of IT support is transportation and actually getting on out to somebody's site and seeing what's going on there. Now imagine if you had to bring a part out and you brought the wrong part or you didn't really know what you had to bring. Let's say it's a printer that is missing an ink cartridge. You brought the ink cartridge out, but when you actually saw it, it was the toner that was a problem, or another issue that you couldn't see just by the description the end user was talking about. Rescue Lens really allows you to visualize that problem and help actually resolve it much quicker. And don't take my word for it. There's a bunch of use cases and case studies that we have up on our website that talk through how customers have actually resolved and used Rescue to navigate through these choppy waters. For example, we have the National Multiple Sclerosis Society that was really facing significant problems. They were increasing their expectations for mobile. It was really a time when they were starting to distribute their own devices, and the BYOD movement was coming in full force. They were striving for high-end user satisfaction levels, but they were also seeing an increased focus on improving that customer service metric as well. In this time using LogMe and Rescue, they were able to alleviate a lot of the issues and actually connect much faster to these customers. And for some of the more advanced use cases, they were able to reduce the downtime for those users and actually provide a quick and pain-free resolution very seamlessly to these end users. And then when you look at a company like Meineke Car Care, they had a very interesting use case because they are almost fully remote workers. As a company that has about 1,000 global stores and 150 employees in almost each store, it was really tough for them to actually manage all the technology and all the employees that were there. They really only had a limited staff that were in their home office, but they didn't have IT people in each one of the stores. So they really needed to find a way to reduce their resolution times, because once you started looking at an IT system in a store that was down, that was a store that wasn't going to be making any money and wasn't going to be bringing in any revenue. And the customers that were coming into that store, they weren't going to be able to buy the products that they needed. So they were going to get a bad taste of Meineke, and they weren't just going to, they can move on to Jiffy Lube or any one of the other companies that were out there, or Napa, and it was really frustrating for the home office. And obviously, they needed to find a way to reduce those support costs. So they came up and they started using LogMe and Rescue. And it was funny because not only were they able to support all of these stores and all of these employees, but they were able to do it with only 10 concurrent licenses. That's how simple it was for them to actually start resolving their IT issues. They were able to resolve these much faster and much quicker, reducing their resolution time by almost half, and actually being able to set up unattended access on each one of the machines, allowing them to connect remotely without anybody actually being there, so they can resolve problems in off hours as well. And not only that, but we're able to provide you with secure remote support technologies that is used in a variety of different use cases, including financial data and financial institutions. When you look at remote support solutions, one of the biggest questions that I get on a constant basis is, how secure is my data and how secure is the connection? And we actually, on the Rescue side, analyze our security compliance on an annual basis and do penetration testing on a biannual basis to make sure that everything is as secure as possible. Because frankly, your data is one of the most important things to us. And if somebody finds a way or gets into that stream of communication back and forth, not only are you going to lose trust in us, but your customers are going to lose trust in you. And one of the case studies and examples that we have on this is from one of our clients, Money Concepts. They're a financial institution providing loans to their customers for high-end transactions, and they needed to provide remote support and actually help their users through actually logging into accounts and transferring data. So through our product, we're able to provide them a way to connect to their customers through one easy online interface, allow them to maintain a list of agents and techs that would actually go through and support these end users. And not only that, but as they turned over, be able to easily administer those users and create reports and view who's been actually accessing the system. So administration and security was very key for Money Concepts. And finally, one of my favorite use cases that we have out there is our Make-A-Wish use case. The reason why this is one of my favorite ones is that Make-A-Wish is a fantastic non-for-profit organization. We actually just presented with these guys in the HDI Fusion show, and it really was very interesting as we started going through the use case. You forget, but when Make-A-Wish, you think of them as an organization, they're really small from a headquarters perspective. They're spread around in a variety of different locations and in chapters and all over the country. But really, there's about 4 people in their help desk, and they support 150 full-time employees and 2,500 cycling volunteers, meaning onboarding, training, systems management are very key for Make-A-Wish. And if their volunteers and their employees are fighting with technology, they're actually not able to help grant wishes anymore. So for Rescue to jump on in there and make it easy for the IT department to help out these users and these volunteers to make sure that their technology is up and running allows them to actually provide more wishes for children, more help for families, and more hope for people that are living through a troubling time. If you want more information on how LogMe and Rescue can help your IT help desk or your organization, you can go to our website at logmeandrescue.com, or you can look at our entire LogMeIn product suite over at logmein.com. Thank you very much, and I'll hand it back over to Roy to go through some Q&A that we might have.
Thank you very much, Peter. I really appreciate it. That's great information for folks to know. And I just wanted to remind you to rate today's webinar. Your feedback helps us to improve future webinars. And now let's take a look at some of your questions. Why do we think the use of asset management systems has dropped between 2015 and 2016? Good question. The only thing I can do is kind of make a little bit of an educated guess and say that the asset management systems are now being incorporated into larger tools. And I know that from a desktop support perspective, probably SCCM is the most broadly used tool, and that does some of the functions that we talked about, such as application, packaging, and distribution. Can also do asset tracking and management within SCCM, or organizations might be purchasing more all-encompassing service management tools that include asset management, configuration management, and so forth. That's an educated guess, is that the tools are getting better and people are buying more sophisticated tools. Thank you for that question. You said that over 57% of organizations have desktop support and the support center as separate functions. Is that up or down from last year? It is in fact about the same as last year. It is up slightly, but within the margin of error, so no big change there. Here's a question for you, Peter. Does Rescue integrate with any ticketing software like Zendesk, ServiceNow, etc.?
Yeah, so out of the box, Rescue integrates with about 15 different CRMs, ticketing systems, and chat technologies that are out there, and we have an open API system that allows you to connect to anything else that you might want to. The out-of-the-box integrations do include ServiceNow, Zendesk, Salesforce, Freshdesk, and some of the other popular ones that are out there.
Okay, great, thank you. Can you explain, this one's for me, I think, can you explain more about level 1 solvable tickets that are being passed to desktop support? Well, I think I mentioned a couple of the factors there. Sometimes, in the heat of the moment, when the tickets are coming fast and furious, or when the phone calls are coming fast and furious, Support Center just doesn't see that it has enough time to address some of these issues, and so that they miraculously show up in the desktop support's ticket flow. But in any case, the important thing to remember there is that if they're resolved at level 1, there's a couple of things that happen. First of all, it's closer to the customer. Second of all, it's faster. So if you go through the types of tickets, so let's say you take your top 15 ticket categories or ticket categorizations from last year, and you go through them carefully, and you start to see what the support center actually has access and authority to fix versus what they actually did fix, that's where you can maybe make some improvement and drive down the number of escalations that you're seeing. Because every time there's an escalation, it costs more and it takes longer, neither one of which is a good thing. Okay? I've got a couple of questions about the salary data. We did not cover salary data today. That will come out in the full report. What I really wanted to focus on was some of the areas of desktop support, hands-on or remote control, and some of the changes between last year and this year. I did not discuss the salary section. That will come out in the technical support practices and salary report. This is only a very small snapshot of the data that we gathered earlier this year. So stay tuned. This is for Peter, I think. Did you find that companies are having a hard time adopting real-time video into their support strategies?
It's interesting because it's a change of culture, but once you start using it, we see a high adoption rate. It has made the experience much better and much faster, and a lot of customers are really receptive to just having somebody look at the problem right now, as opposed to waiting and sitting around. We see a lot of uptick in our customer service side and our as well as our IT side for help desk.
Great, thank you. And follow-on question, do you have any restrictions on the types of phones that you can support with Rescue? So I guess that by phones they mean mobile devices there.
Right now we have a small limitation on iOS for remote control, but for Android we can remote control a significant portion of the market as well as remotely view the screens by default for almost every Android 5 and higher device. And when it comes to Android Rescue Lens, almost any device you can utilize Rescue Lens on Android or on iPhone. We're a little bit of a waiting period on Windows and any new BlackBerries that come on out. Right now we're limited on those, but I don't think there's much market share there.
Great, thank you. And one more question. The Support Center and desktop support both provide remote support. Why is desktop support even needed? Well, it's a great question. However, as I mentioned, about half or maybe a little more than half of the tickets are being resolved using remote support right now. So there are still issues that have to be resolved hands-on. It might be a case where there is no connectivity from a laptop, for example, and it just becomes inaccessible, so somebody actually has to physically go to the device. Or it might be something hardware related, which is outside the purview of remote control, or the support center can't do it unless they're doing a jump and run model where somebody actually goes to the desk side. But in addition to that, the role of desktop support has changed over the last several years to where they've absorbed a lot of other work. For example, voice over internet protocol, telephones, network closets, any connections from the closet out to the desktop becomes a purview of desktop support. Audio visual, there's just a huge array of tasks with desktop support is tasked. So it's important to remember that desktop support still does serve a very big function. Here's a comment, and I will gladly address it. Title of the presentation, Desktop Support Practices and Salary Data. It's called that because of the name of the survey. The survey is the Support Practices and Salary Survey. So I'm sorry if you were looking for the salary data. We did not address that today. That would probably make a pretty good presentation all on its own, and maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll take that under advisement and use that as a webinar in itself. Thank you. And just one more briefly before we have to sign off for the day. Is there a desktop support service catalog available? Good question. I've never seen one. and that would be up to your organization to configure and provide. So thank you very much. Check things out at thinkhdi.com. There is a desktop support category there, and you can look back on previous salary reports if you are a member of HDI. Thank you very much to Peter Zenoon, to our sponsor, LogMeIn Rescue, and to all of you for attending today. This webcast is copyright 2016 by United Business Media, LLC. The presentation materials are owned by and or copyrighted, if that is the case, by HDI, which is solely responsible for its content, and individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. Thank you very much for attending today, and we hope to see you soon.